My guess is that you have been reading or hearing the story of Daniel in the lion's den all wrong all these years. Today we are looking at Daniel chapter 4 to chapter 6, and I'm hoping there's a couple things that I can highlight here. I know that Daniel in the lion's den is probably one of the most popular stories in the Bible ever, and probably lots of people who aren't even believers know the story of Daniel in the lion's den. But there's a couple details in it that you probably haven't caught before, and there's a couple things you should know about it that you may not have heard before. Looking at Daniel chapter 4 to 6, chapter 4 is about Nebuchadnezzar basically sort of losing his mind and losing his power in his kingdom. He wanders off into a field and he ends up eating grass, and he lives out in the open, and basically all of his power and all of his authority is taken away from him. Chapter 5 is about how King Belshazzar, not Belteshazzar, Belshazzar, is kind of reveling in this giant party in his palace, and he brings up the gold and silver cups from the temple in Jerusalem so that he can have everybody at his party drink out of them, and this hand shows up on the wall, and he is put to shame. Basically, the hand on the wall writes on the wall, essentially, that he is going to lose all his power, and King Belshazzar loses all his power that night. He's actually killed that night. And then Daniel chapter 6 is Daniel in the lion's den, where King Darius signs an injunction, signs a decree that basically he is the most powerful king in all the land, and everyone should pray to and serve him. And he is put to shame because Daniel is thrown in the lion's den. Daniel survives the lion's den. Darius makes a new proclamation that no one should serve any god but Daniel's God. So the interesting thing about these chapters is that a lot of times we talk about Daniel in the lion's den and we just pull the story out of the book of Daniel without looking at what is around it. And just with me kind of going through these chapters, you'll notice that the theme of really the book and the theme of these couple of chapters is that God is powerful, God is sovereign, God deserves all the honor and glory, and God does whatever he wants with any ruler he wants. So Nebuchadnezzar would have been the most powerful king at the time. He would have been reigning over the largest empire at the time, and God basically turns him into a cow. And then at the end of that story, Nebuchadnezzar declares that God is the only God and nobody should serve anybody but the God of heaven and earth. Then you get the second story of Belshazzar. Belshazzar is humiliated by God, and the entire audience that hears this vision interpreted by Daniel understands that there is no God but Daniel's God. And then when Daniel is thrown in the lion's den, it is King Darius that declares to the entire nation, empire, kingdom, that there is no God but Daniel's God. So one of my pet peeves with the story of Daniel in the lion's den is that the point is not how faithful Daniel is. The point of Daniel in the lion's den is never that Daniel is amazing and we should all dare to be a Daniel. Is that a great lesson? Sure, it probably is. But the lesson of these stories in context is that God is great, and God is over all authorities, God is over all dangers, God is over all events, God is sovereign, God rules, God does what he wants to do. And so it is not Daniel that is great, it is God that is great. We should not strive to be like Daniel, we should strive to be like God. If we try to be like Daniel, we're just going to be defeated. We're not meant to be Daniel. We weren't made to be Daniel. We were made to honor the Lord and lift up the name of the Lord. And so there's a couple things here in Daniel that I also think, I opened the episode talking about how there are some details you may have missed. Probably one of the favorite things that I have noticed with the book of Daniel is how many things Daniel has in common with Jesus in Daniel 6. Now, you might listen to me and you might think this is a little bit of a stretch, but it is pretty remarkable. Daniel is basically set up. Daniel is faithfully praying to God every single day, 3 times a day, That's not some kind of weird ancient custom. That is just what Daniel has decided to do. If you want to see what his prayers are like, you can look at Daniel chapter 9 because it is a recording of one of his prayers. But Daniel's in this habit of praying all the time. And so when people try to find a fault in Daniel so that they can ruin his power and his authority and his influence, the only thing they can do is falsely accuse him. And so Daniel has to be part of this plan where he will be accused of breaking the law. He hasn't really broken any laws except for the people that are out to get him know that he will consistently be praying. And he is indeed apprehended while he is praying. Interesting thing about that is that Jesus himself was falsely accused. The people wanted to get him out of the way. They couldn't find any fault in him. So all they could do is set up kind of a false charge and try to catch him in it. And they also catch him while he is making a point of praying to God in the Garden of Gethsemane. So the two of them are falsely accused. The two of them are apprehended while praying. They are brought before the royal ruler in the region. Here, Daniel's brought before Darius. Jesus is brought before Pilate. Both of the royal rulers in both of the stories do not want to charge this person or condemn this person to death. They are essentially like shocked that anybody would seek to kill Jesus or anybody would seek to kill Daniel. But the accusers are still set against Daniel and against Jesus, and the ruler is caught in a tight place, and they have to carry out the punishment that they've been asked to carry out. So Pilate washes his hands of Jesus' blood, and Darius spends all night without sleeping at all. He's obviously extremely tormented. Then we have both Daniel and Jesus handed over into punishment. Now, this is where I'm in probably a little bit more of a stretch than usual, but Jesus is actually put to death on the cross, which was a horrible, horrible form of capital punishment. Daniel is essentially put to death. I think when people are thrown into a lion's den, they are not expected to survive. Actually, you can see where Daniel's thrown in the den and the lions leave him alone, but the text actually makes sure to tell you that all of Daniel's accusers later on, when they're thrown in the lion's den, before they even hit the ground, the lions destroy them and eat them. So Daniel was essentially a dead man when he was thrown into this tomb. And there is a cover put over the tomb, and there is a seal that marks the tomb. It's kind of a fun little detail or an interesting little detail that you might miss if you don't really pay attention to it. But Pilate makes sure that Jesus' tomb is sealed and guarded, and Darius makes sure that Daniel's tomb is sealed and guarded. Now, the other crazy thing is that early in the morning, with Jesus it was 3 days later, with Daniel it was only 1 day later, early in the morning people run down to the tomb, hoping to find something that indicates that this person is alive. Jesus on the third day walks out of the tomb completely alive. He went in a dead man, he came out living. Daniel, in this kind of rhetorical sense, went into the tomb a dead man and comes out living. In both instances, everybody who encounters this person after they emerge from the tomb is significantly impacted. And along with the theme of Daniel 4, 5, and 6, Darius proclaims that everybody needs to serve Daniel's God. And with Jesus, he comes out of the tomb and basically makes a profound impact on around 500 people before he ascends into heaven and reminds everybody to make disciples. So these two stories are really similar. I think that is really, really interesting. Daniel serves as a kind of literary figure that points to Jesus. But ultimately, don't get it twisted, these stories are about how powerful, how great, how awesome, how reliable, how faithful our God is, and not about how amazing Daniel is. So don't mix it up. Daniel might be a great example to follow, but Jesus is an even greater example to follow, and we look to him for our salvation. One of my favorite things to say about this story is that when Daniel walked out of the tomb alive, he saved only his own life. God was faithful to him and kept him alive throughout the night, but when Jesus walked out of the tomb alive, he actually saved all of our lives. So Daniel had a very small influence. Jesus had a much bigger influence. Daniel is an allusion to Jesus, but Jesus is ultimately much, much, much greater than Daniel. So I love this story. I enjoyed it a lot. hopefully you get a lot out of it. I think my encouragement to you for your part today is just not to get these stories mixed up. Like, we want to strive to be like Jesus. We want to worship Jesus because God is much greater than any character in any of these stories. And I believe that is what is at the center of Daniel 4-6. So hope you enjoyed this little bit. We'll be back again tomorrow looking at Daniel 7-9. We'll see you then.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.